Hi viewers, good afternoon. Another episode of Guest with Nazir. We are honored. Today's special guest is a proud daughter of a steelworker, sitting MP from Sheffield, Hillsborough and Brightside, and she's our Shadow Minister, one and only Gill Furniss. Jill, welcome in our show.
Thank you very much for inviting me, Naz.
Jill, please tell our viewers about your early life and your education.
Right, I was brought up in Parson Cross, which is part of the community that I represent, the constituency. And my dad was a steel worker. My mum stayed at home, although she had worked in a department store before that, and she was a fashion buyer. She used to go to Paris and places like that. But I think, really, I lived on a council estate in a council house, and I went to Lindsay Road School, which used to be there but is there no longer, and I then went on to Chaucer School, where I studied there. The steelworks was so important when I was growing up because almost everyone's dad worked in the steelworks, even mums worked in the steelworks. And when I did leave school, I actually did go and work in British Steel, which is now Forge Masters, and I worked there for a few months as well in their heavy forge cost office. And it's quite strange now when I go and meet with the chief exec of Forge Masters going through the same gate that I went through for my very first job. So it's just, such an honour and a privilege to have this sort of job. And never did I think when I was growing up that I would finish up in Parliament.
Jill, please tell our viewers, you started as career librarian. So it means you have a very close eyes on the libraries and especially the importance of studies.
Oh, absolutely. I think it's just about everything for me, really, libraries. I went to work for British Steel. I worked there about 6 weeks and I was so bored that I'd actually applied to go into libraries before I'd left school, but I got a letter to say they'd interview me, and they did. And that was it. I went to work there. But my dad enrolled me at a library when I was only 4 or 5, and he used to take me every week on the bus to Firth Park Library. And that was, ironically, the first library I worked at, the old library on Firth Park Road, which is closed now. So I went to work there, and I just always loved books. I was a reader. And when I became, working in a library, I realised what a difference it made to people's lives, and that, where you've got a good public library, you particularly in deprived communities like many of ours are, you give people hope, you give them a safe space to go to, you give them the opportunity to read for pleasure but to read for studies as well. And the library staff are so well skilled in pointing people in the right direction for the advice, the information, that it's so important for a society like ours that information and knowledge you can get for free at the point of use, to me.
What are your views? Now the information is changing dramatically. We are moving from the paper books to the gadgets and also on the online system. So your people are going to miss the books, or?
No, I think that's been a slow evolution, really. As the technologies develop, libraries have adapted to those technologies. And certainly at the moment, where I'm involved in a campaign where we're trying to axe the tax on e-readers and e-reader books, because at the moment there is a tax on them, which there isn't on, paper books. So I'm involved in that campaign, and it's probably unsurprising that I'm the chair of the all-party political group on libraries as well, which has been a great honour, and it's just fantastic to work with other people like Lord Bird, who founded The Big Issue, to try and make libraries better and to fight for the funding. And we have got some funding recently from the government to actually spend on libraries. Not enough. Yeah. We'll keep on fighting, but there is a bit of money coming, and I like to think that's because of the pressure that me, Graham Tope, Lord Tope and Lord Bird have joined together to present to government ministers, as we did last year, the case for better funding for libraries, and putting over that they're not just about books, they're about a community space, like I said earlier, a safe space, a learning space, a cultural space. Libraries can do almost anything. And also the economy, important to the economy, because we can get involved in the schools agenda, we can help businesses, we can signpost businesses to sources of funding and get business experts in there as well.
Sheffield has a huge impact with steel industry, but unfortunately now it is almost a very, very slim industry in the city. Yeah. So what were the main reasons? Because if we look at the history, this was a signature mark for this city.
Oh, it was. I mean, we still are known as Sheffield City of Steel. You know, people don't forget that. And as I said, when I was a child growing up, every family had at least one, you know, the mum or the dad or both. You know, in cases like I worked in the office, there were lots of women in offices. There were catering staff, there were cleaners. There weren't so many. I can't ever remember seeing a female steel worker. But I have to say, because I represent steel as well, on the, you know, as a shadow minister, I've done a bit of a tour, and I have now found that there are women in steelworks, which I'm very pleased about. But they are not really the same sort of jobs as when I was a child. I remember my dad taking me into his place of work to show me on a weekend when it wasn't too busy, and it was quite terrifying. You know, there were the furnaces just going for it. There were men sort of rolling the steel from one another, you know, absolutely red hot, and you could see the red colouring of it. You know, it's they call red hot for a reason. Yes, they really are. And now you do not get that. When I've gone on shop floors, I've been to Port Talbot, I've been to Shotton, I've been to Scunthorpe. And, you know, it is a different story now. It's a very clean industry, very automated, but still produces a lot of steel, but clearly on a much smaller workforce. There are only now about 32,000 steel workers in the country.
In your CV, there is a change from steel work, then library, and then all of a sudden, politics. What brought you in politics?
Well, I think when I first started work, I went to work for Sheffield City Libraries, and I didn't really, I suppose I'd only be 16 because I left school at 16 just with some GCSEs, and didn't really get too much involved with sort of trade unionism. I used to go to trade union meetings, but I'd just sit and listen to people telling us what was going on. And then I went to work in the library at what used to be Shifcliffe College, where there's a big housing estate now, just up the road from where my office is. And there was trouble and strife going on, and there were a few problems, and I suppose I was the one that usually didn't mind sticking my hand up and, you know, having my three halfpence, really. A bit mouthy, I suppose some people would call it. And eventually, I think because I was always the one going, what about this, I was invited to become a shop steward, which I did for the Sheffield College, and I went on to be the chief shop steward. And in fact, I led negotiations with management of the Sheffield College when they were closing centres down. And they did, in fact, close down what used to be at Stradbroke, and the college that I worked at Parson Cross as well, which was very sad. But I did so, and I was also on the governing body. I was elected to the governing body to represent support staff. So I think during those processes, I think I must have got a bit addicted to elections, because that was my first election to go on the governing body. And then before much longer, I'd sort of joined the Labour Party, and then a friend of mine who was another shop steward at Sheffield College, Marjorie Barker, she actually went on council, and she encouraged me to come on as well. And so I followed on to the council. And that was just over 20 years ago when I first went on to council, and I represented Manor Ward then, and then subsequently Southey. Working
in the council and then in a parliament, it's a huge change. So what are the different duties you are doing at the moment?
Oh, it's completely different. I mean, it is a full-on job. It's more than full-time, you know, very long hours we work, particularly at the moment. And I think being on council sort of prepares you to have the self-confidence to present yourself and to speak in public, so that's good. But the processes are completely different and very traditional, I think is probably the way of putting it, in that you know, we are, I suppose, the mother of all parliaments, as they like to call us. We're a massive focus of tourists. You know, the galleries are always full of people who've queued up for hours to come in and, you know, watch debates and see us, you know, live. And I think there is a very much move not to be too modern. I think, you know, when you look at other parliaments across the world, they're in a modern setting. Ours is obviously still in a very, very old and historic building. And I think I've had to learn sometimes a new language completely because they can be a bit flowery, which is not how I speak. I'm very straightforward. So I suppose you do have to learn lots of different terms and how to refer to people, and who's an honourable friend and who's an honourable member, you know, because you use different terms to different categories of people. And who's an honourable and who's not an honourable. So it's all a learning curve, but No, it's a fabulous job, absolutely fabulous.
Please tell our viewers what was the subject of your maiden speech, because when you are in Parliament, it's a great honour, it's a historical moment for somebody's life. So what was the subject of your maiden speech?
Do you know, I did my maiden speech, I think it was either the first or the second week, it might have been the second week, and I've not got much of a memory of it. I think I was so very sort of bewildered by suddenly being into a new environment that was very different, and I've not got a great deal. I know that I spoke about Sheffield Wednesday, because you have to. You've always got to refer to the football team that you support. So I remember putting a joke in about Sheffield Wednesday. I spoke a lot about the area, and I desperately wanted to mention the shame of having 11 food banks in my area, and that's something I want to see change, because I think it's quite shameful that in one of the fifth richest country we can't afford for people to feed themselves. So we have
international viewers also.
Yeah.
So for their knowledge point of view, please tell our viewers what are the jobs of a shadow minister, because they are aware of the terminology minister or a secretary, but they are not aware of this terminology, shadow minister. So what are the main job prescription and, I would say, duties for that?
Well, I suppose we shadow the government ministers. So because I've got quite a diverse portfolio, because as you said, I've got steel, I've got Royal Mail, I've got post offices, I've got consumer affairs, and I've got pubs, strangely enough. I'm not quite sure how that fell into my portfolio. So I actually shadow 2 ministers, because that's how there is a minister for business who's got some of those things in her portfolio, and then there is another one who does different steel and that sort of thing as well. But I have to say, I've been doing this job for 3 years now, and I think I've had three or four different ministers in that time, because they've always finished up resigning for one reason or another, or they've been demoted, or they've left, or there's been a scandal. So I find that I have to get used to another one quite often. So my job is to hold them to account. So
basically we may say, like, I will not say opposition leader for a minister, but you are a personality who does all the, I will say, observation on their work, and their duties, or if there are any changings are coming.
That's
One
right.
important thing which I've noticed in your portfolio, consumer protection, which is very, very important.
Very.
From buying a bottle of milk to buying to an expensive car. So have you introduced any changes for the consumers?
Well, we can't introduce changes because only the government can introduce changes. We can try and amend bills at different parts, as we may have heard a few words about amendments this last week or two. But what I've been doing is working very closely with Jeremy Corbyn to actually set out our manifesto commitments in all the 3 areas. So we're hoping to launch the steel manifesto pretty soon. Our plans for the steel industry to make it sustainable. Because we don't want to see the steel industry wither and die. It would be such a sad day for the country if we did. We've been working with Martin Lewis, who some of you may have heard of, on his television show Money Saving Expert, and we're doing a little bit of work with him because he's very good at sort of telling us the problems that he's got and how we can sort of change that into legislation. So we're working on that as well. And pubs, we're working with the APPJ, Toby Perkins from Chesterfield as well. So we're looking at how we can actually work, things into manifesto. So as well as holding the government to account, I meet with lots of people from all those industries and associations, and we work together to try and look at how a Labour government can improve things.
So it's accountability mostly?
Well, no, it's developing new policies for when we come into government, but at the same time, I will speak at the dispatch box when we have debates. I will go into Westminster Hall and as well and round up debates there opposite the Minister and ask the Minister some very difficult questions, and I quite often am the lead in statutory instruments that are done more or less in committee rooms.
Another linked question, Brexit. So what are your personal views? Are we better off leaving Europe, or we should remain? One simple answer.
Well, I voted Remain because I like the feel of being a Europe. I like the idea of being able to just move about Europe as though it's part of, us really, because, geographically it is our nearest neighbour. So it is nice to sort of know that you can do that. But when the result came out that people wanted to leave, I think we should respect that vote, that opinion, and we should respect that vote. But as time has gone on, we now see that the government are completely failing to actually come up with any plan that can get through the House of Commons. So I said to some people have been in to talk to me about a year, 18 months ago, and asked me, and I said, look, I just want, I would like to remain, but I know if I've lost, so we have to move on. And I did say at the time, but if it comes to a time where it looks like we're in deadlock, I think the only answer is probably to have a referendum on that.
So second referendum on the same point of view?
If we're in deadlock like we are now, I think that is the best way forward, because a general election in the end run will be a referendum by another name, but we could come back hung again.
Some political commentators say that when this referendum was introduced, a lot of information was not public. Is it right that people were not understanding the full comprehensions of the implications and the legal implication of it?
I think there's a lot, there's a lot of points to raise on Brexit, really. I think you're absolutely right. People were told by some of the Leave campaigns that we would be £365 million a week better off and it would go in the National Health Service. And Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister, was one of those who went out to say that. Now we find out that isn't true. And that is, I think, a big worry for some people. But I think probably the biggest thing is the Northern Ireland problem, that no one really spoke about that. And I think David Cameron was wrong to call a referendum, to be honest, because he didn't do it very well. Because a lot of referendums, usually throughout Europe and beyond, you would have a threshold probably at about 60%, so that you got a proper mandate. Our problem has been a hair's breadth between remain and leave.
I see. So there should be more options for the people.
And I think this is, if people say to me like, I hear people say, I'm from a Brexit constituency. Well, you're not really, because it's a large mixture of two different views. And you can't just ignore the Remainers, because you've got to try and reach some sort of compromise. And I think this government has made a big mistake and missed a massive opportunity, because when Theresa May came back in 2017, she knew that was a hung parliament.
Because of time restraints, I will ask another quick question. Yeah. Whether we should have a written constitution or we are okay with this unwritten constitution?
I have not given that a lot of thought, to be honest. I think probably we've sort of dawdled along for a long time as we are, that we're fine. That's something I need to give more thought.
Okay. Yeah. I'll ask another question. Recently, you've been in a very big public rally. It was about the human rights issue. Yeah. In Kashmir.
Of course.
And you have a lot of constituents who are from that part of the world. So what are your view about this situation, and what solution you will suggest to the world?
Well, I think, I've worked quite closely with the Asian population, the Kashmiri people. And it really pains me to see the stress that this causes everyone, and the people who've got relatives out there at the moment. Some terrible, terrible things are happening. And it has escalated in just the last few months to something that's quite frightening. And it's something that we've got to get a grip of, really. We know that the new Prime Minister of India is just really messing about with the rights of the Kashmiris. We know that there are young men going missing. We know that for years there's been a range of measures, including pellet guns and blinding young people, and that has got to stop. And the United Nations have got to intervene on this. They absolutely have to, because it is a huge humanitarian crisis. And more recently, we've seen, deserted streets out there. There are curfews. There's rape being used as a weapon of war. And we have got to make sure that the United Nations do that. And I know Emily Thornberry, who was our Shadow Minister, is working really hard to get that message out there. But, we've always said that we wanted you to be, people out there to self-determine, to exercise their right to choose what they want. So,
right of self-determination. Yeah. Gill, because of the time restraints, any quick message for our viewers?
Well, there's some exciting times coming up. We think there'll be a general election coming along soon. Please keep faith with Labour. We will do whatever we can to make sure we have an ethical foreign policy and that there will be no one left behind, that we will look after the vulnerable, because the measure of a society is how well you look after those who are most vulnerable.
This is your own
Vote
view.
Labour.
This is your own views, because obviously it is the public choice, whatever they decide. Viewers, this was Guest with Nazir. I hope you will enjoy today's episode. Keep watching Sheffield Live TV.